The first semi-orbital space trip conducted by Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin in July 2021 was news itself. But it also drew attention as the story of an 82-year-old female passenger who achieved his dream of space travel in 60 years. The woman, named Wally Funk, was one of 13 female astronaut candidates who were selected and trained in the U.S. National Aeronautics and Space Administration's unofficial female astronaut training program, Mercury 13 inches, in the early 1960s. However, Funk's dream failed to come true because of NASA's wall, which limited his astronaut status to a high-speed fighter pilot with an engineering degree. At that time, women could not become fighter pilots. In the meantime, the Soviet Union took the title of the world's first female astronaut. It was in 1983, 20 years later, that the United States produced the first female astronaut. Space exploration is considered one of the areas with the most imbalance between men and women. Of the 620 people who have been to space for 65 years, since humans first flew into space, only 70 are women. That's about 10%. In particular, there are no women at all in the 24 astronauts of the Apollo spacecraft in the U.S. who have been to the lunar surface, or lunar orbit of deep space, not low Earth orbit. Meanwhile, in a recent paper published in an international journal, female astronauts have more water and energy than men. It was found to use less oxygen and emit less carbon dioxide, and generate less heat due to metabolism. Scientists therefore suggested that women should take precedence over deep space exploration, such as the Moon and Mars, where costs are higher and the environment is harsher. If an astronaut does half an hour of aerobic exercise twice a day for 6 days a week, oxygen consumption, carbon dioxide emissions, and heat generation will increase than usual, and more water will be needed to replenish moisture. The larger the body size, the larger the amount, and the wider the gap between men and women. According to the researchers' calculations, on average, female astronauts need 26% less calories, 29% less oxygen, and 18% less water than men. For example, if 4 female astronauts stay at the space station for 1080 days, their total food intake is 1,695 kilograms less than that of men. This is 10% of the payload of SpaceX's Falcon Heavy rocket. In other words, sending a female astronaut can reduce the cost of launching. Women also have an advantage in terms of the size of the mission spacecraft. In a small space like a space station, a smaller woman can move and work more freely. According to NASA, the cost of transporting cargo to the International Space Station amounts to $93,400 per kilogram. According to NASA, the cost of transporting cargo to the International Space Station amounts to $93,400 per kilogram. This is 4% of the HALO module, a residential facility of the Lunar Orbit Station, Gateway, that NASA will build to promote the new lunar manned landing program Artemis. Female astronauts also had relatively little change in total energy consumption, according to their size. This is because women use less oxygen and water than men of the same size, and emit less carbon dioxide and heat generation, based on height of 150 centimeters to 190 centimeters. The amount of change was 5% to 29% less than that of men. Things are changing. 9, or half, of NASA's 18 astronauts selected to prepare for its new manned lunar landing program Artemis in 2020 were women. NASA has decided to send a female astronaut for the first time in history on the manned lunar orbit of Artemis 2, scheduled for late 2024. It then plans to set up an exploration team, including a female astronaut, for the manned landing of Artemis 3 in 2025. Even though it was not noticeable, women have been consistently involved in spaceflight since its early days, in terms of science, technology, medicine, and administration. The fact that women are flying into space shows the great struggle of women. It was also a history of women themselves that participated in science and technology in the 20th century, and created opportunities to reflect political interests. Wait a minute. Who was the first female astronaut to go into space? In the late spring of 1963, Soviet astronaut Valentina Tereshkova was the first woman to fly into space. Tereshkova volunteers for the astronaut program. After German Titov flew the Vostok 2 in 1961. He was nominated along with 4 other women and trained at Zeleni's Astronaut Training Center. One of the reasons for selection was that Tereshkova had experience in parachuting. The Soviet Vostok spacecraft used a parachute to return to Earth. An astronaut had to jump out of the aircraft before landing. Tereshkova successfully completed the 3-day flight of Vostok 6 from the 16th of June 1963, and was immediately followed by praise in Russia. But it wasn't that he was able to go into space based on pure progressive beliefs about women. It was the political decision of the Soviet Union to train women into spaceflight. The Commander-in-Chief of the Air Force, who oversaw the astronaut program, said in 1961 that women would eventually fly into space. In any case, the first woman to go into space should not be an American, emphasizing that she should be trained soon. This is an insult to the patriotism of Soviet women, and Tereshkova's spaceflight was a scene in this international politics. Women, like NASA's space program, have always been left out of men's high-tech fields, and have never had the opportunity to challenge themselves in authoritative fields. Their political status in American society has always been controversial. He had to withdraw helplessly if he got involved in an argument. In the 1970s, as the Cold War tensions eased, and the United States and the Soviet Union collaborated on spaceflight, women finally joined as astronauts in the United States. Women made a special contribution to spaceflight. It didn't get that much public attention, and it continued to this day. The fact that women are flying into space shows the great struggle of women. It was also a history of women themselves that created opportunities to reflect political interests by participating in science and technology. In the 20th century, now things are showing signs of change. Research papers encouraging the development of female astronauts also support this. Women have always explored nature and pursued knowledge. Not only institutional barriers, but also daily sex discrimination and harassment. I faced abuse and violence, but I overcame difficulties without stopping my efforts. And it makes modern science stand tall today. How many female scientists do you know? Most of the time, Marie Curie. It stops at about Rosalind Franklin. There is a growing interest in female scientists inside and outside our science and technology community, in the process of overcoming gender discrimination and prejudice in society as a whole. There are growing calls for female scientists and engineers to take advantage of their abilities. But historically, there are many cases in the world where female scientists are discriminated against and neglected, or their achievements are not properly evaluated. From ancient times to the present day, women have been absolute in the development of science. But it's hard to find a record of female scientists in history. I don't even know how many of them there are, let alone their stories. Why? It's because the narrow nature of science and male-centered prejudice have hidden the story of female scientists over the years. NASA has decided to send a female astronaut for the first time in its history on the manned lunar orbit of Artemis 2, scheduled for late 2024. It then plans to set up an exploration team, including a female astronaut, for the manned landing of Artemis 3 in 2025.